Yep, there you go. Wrong again. There it is. Good thing Brother Dennis isn't here, because he'd be sitting there looking at me trying to read my lips, because he can't hear anyway. So, Brother Dennis, if you're listening online, now you got it. All right, Numbers chapter 13 and verse number 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel, of every tribe of their fathers. They shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them. And Moses by commandment of the Lord sent them from the wilderness of Paran, all those men which were heads of the children of Israel. And then you see in verse 4 through 16, there's a bunch of names, and those are all the heads of those individual tribes. And you can't, I would do it even in Hebrew, but I'd mess that up too. So we'll skip those and we'll get to verse 17. And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get ye up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be ye of good courage, and bring the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So here we have Moses, and they're sitting on the cusp of going into Canaan, right? Going into Canaan. He's setting up the guys that are going to go spy out the territory, because when they come back, remember, God's promised them you're going to cross over. So remember, they've left Egypt, they've gone through the wilderness, and they're here on the cusp of greatness, getting ready to go into the land. And Moses has chosen out, based on what God tells him to do, 12 spies to go into Canaan. And we pick up in verse 21. So they went up, and they searched the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob, and the men come to Hamath. And they ascended by the south, and came to Hebron with Ahiman. Shusha and Telamai, the children of Anak, were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came into the brook of Eshcol, and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they bare it between two upon a staff. And they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. Now you have to imagine, that is a big clump of grapes. So when God says, I'm going to send you into the land of milk and honey, a promised land, he's not lying, right? That is a big bunch of grapes that you got to carry on a stick between two men. Verse 24, and the place was called the brook of Eshcol, because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. So they were going a long time searching out this land, here, though, and everywhere in between, north, south, east, and west, getting a good look at the lay of the land. And verse 26, and they went and came unto Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel under the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. I've got written in my Bible proof there beside that, right? Because God promised, they went, they came back, they brought back the proof. Verse 27, and they told him and said, We came into the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled, and they're very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. Now the children of Anak were supposed to be giants, right? That's why they mentioned that particular name. And the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses, and he said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report for the land which they searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants and the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Now, if you look at verses 31 through 33, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 references as we or are, right? And I want to call that out because what we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit of perspective in the time of trouble, right? That's what we're going to focus on. And what we want to look here is perspective. We have to remember that if you're these men, if you're these spies, you know a couple things, right? Number one, you've been called to do a work for the Lord. Moses has called you out by name and said, you're going to go into this land and you're going to spy it out, right? So we've got that perspective in it. It was promised to them in Genesis 12:7, Genesis 12:18, and a bunch of other times before this. And God told Abram, when he was Abram, and also when he was Abraham, I will give you the land, right? See, the promise was true because they brought back the grapes. They said, surely it is a land of milk and honey. And 4, like I said, 4, they were called to the work. It was promised. The promise was true. And also the report was true. When they came back to tell Moses, and Caleb was with them, and they said, it is a land of milk and honey. Great. That's what God said it was going to be. Oh, but by the way, nevertheless, in verse 28, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. So there's giants in the land. There's people everywhere. The land is the land that eateth up the inhabitants, right? And their report and perspective was also true, right? You are seeing true perspectives all the way through this story. The difference is how we look at it through the lens of perspective, right? We have got 3 options in this story as we go down to verse 33. We can look at our own perspective or these spies' perspective, right? We can look at God's perspective or we can look at the enemy's perspective. So our perspective or the spies' perspective is God didn't lie to us. It's true. Look at the big clump of grapes we brought back. However, nevertheless, even though that may be true, even though what God said was true, even what God told us was going to be true, our perspective is we can't overtake it. They have great walls. They're going to eat us up. We can't take it. There's nothing we can do about it. They are giants. Look at verse 33. There we saw giants and the son of Anak, which come to the giants. We were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So these spies come back, and their perspective is what God promised us is true, but only half of his promise. He told us the land was great. It was a land of milk and honey. He told us we could have it, but I don't believe that part. I only believe the part that the land is actually very good and we want to be in there. And so what you get is this conflict growing in these spies to the point in which they say, we shouldn't go. Now, you have to see the other perspective, which is God's perspective. God is saying, everything I've told you so far up to this time through Numbers chapter 13 has been true. I told you I was going to send you somebody to bring you out of Egypt. I told you you were going to be there a long time, 40 years, because you didn't listen to me. I told you I would bring you to Canaan. I told you that Moses was going to send spies in and have a look. I told you it was going to be a land of milk and honey. I told you I was going to give it to you. So God is sitting on the other side of the fence saying, what's the problem? Right? What are you guys struggling with? Everything I told you was going to be true has been true. All of my promises up to this point have been true. Why are you struggling? And this is an interesting perspective and a different lens that we live through every day in our own life. We walk with the Lord, and he says, look, life is going to be hard, but you know the end of the book. You know that salvation reigns. You know that you can always get through. I told you I'd send a comforter. I told you I'd always be there. I told you I'd help you through the problems. I told you you'd have a church of people who could support you through that. I told you how important the local church was. I told you all of the things that I would do for you. I would give you courage, a strong heart. I would comfort you at night, all of these things. But then we stand on the other side and say, yeah, but Lord, I know that all your promises to me in the past were true. And I know all your promises were true for everybody else. And I know up to this point in my life, you've always been true to me. But I'm not sure you're going to be true to the next step. And then we take that one step, and then we struggle again. Well, what about the next step, Lord? Will you be true again? And God is sitting on the other side saying, all you have to do is step. All you have to do is trust me in the promise that I've given you. And the problem and why we struggle so much as Christians, as humans in it, is because also our perspective is true. Lord, I'm having a hard time. I don't know what to do. I've lost my job. I'm struggling with my health. Right? We can't see what God sees. So we only look at problems through our perspective. But God is sitting in the background saying, yeah, but I also created the universe. And when the firmament was across the world, I separated the water and the earth and all of these things. And he's saying, the promise has always been true. And because I'm a true and righteous God, it will always be true. And you've trusted me in the past, trust me now. Trust me in the next thing. Just like we preached a couple weeks ago on a Wednesday night when we were talking about Peter. Just get out of the boat. right? Just take the step. Just get out of the boat because I've promised you and I can guarantee it to be true. And then we've got another perspective that's happening in the background, which is the enemy's perspective. Whether it be the Amalekites and Anak, the men of giants, or whatever it may be here in Canaan, or in our own life, the devil and sin and all of these types of things, who is whispering in our ear all the time, yeah, but is God going to be true this time? Can you really do that thing he's asking you to do? Can you really make it through? Do you really need God? Did he really do what he said he was going to do in the past? And you've got all of these things flying around in your head as a Christian, going through a troubling time in your life. And what I'm going to say to you is, know that they're all true. Know that what God says is true. And also know what you see is probably also true. What you're feeling is a true emotion. Lord, I'm struggling. What's happened to me? My car broke down. I don't have money to fix it. Whatever the trial is true. You're also going through it. If you weren't, you wouldn't think you were. But what you have to remember also is the enemy wants you to think those things. And he is crouching like a lion waiting to devour when you slip and fall. And when we see those things happening in our life, what we have to do is take a step back as Christians and say, I know how I feel. I know what the devil wants me to do. He wants me to slip and fall. But what I also know to be true and forever true is what God has told me and promised me. So of all of these perspectives, only one matters, which is God's. Now that's a hard thing to do when we go through trouble, but it's very important that we look at it that way. And the reason why is because we run a risk if we don't. If we let our fear and our trouble and our untrust in God take over, you're going to see what happens. You're going to get into chapter 14, which is what these Israelites were struggling with. Chapter 14 and verse number 1 says, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. They were disheartened by the testimony of those spies. So careful what your testimony is, number 1. 2, and all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in the wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land? To fall by the sword, to our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us make a captain and let us return to Egypt. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you have the wrong perspective in troubles and trials, they will return you to Egypt. You will go back to a place that was not good for you. And you will go back to a place that God didn't intend for you to ever be. Right? And what I want you to remember tonight is, don't let your perspective or your fear drive you back to Egypt. Because it will. If you trust your own emotion, what you think is right, and you don't trust in the Lord, you will find yourself slipping back into old habits. Slipping back into not trusting God, or if I just work on a Sunday and work on a Wednesday night because I need more money to pay my bills, or whatever it may be, you will suddenly find yourself driven back to Egypt, and you'll be like these Israelites saying, it was better for us there. We almost died in the wilderness. It would have been better for us if we had died in the wilderness. Actually, I'm going to put a new captain in charge of my life, and I want to go back. And the problem with that is a couple things. One, you got no business being there. If the Lord wanted you there, he would have kept you there, right? Number 1. And number 2, what if they didn't go? What if they didn't go into Canaan? What if the Bible ended there with the Israelites and they just said they stayed on one side of the River Jordan and they actually never went in? The rest of the Old Testament would have never been written as we know it, right? Number 1, they would have missed a blessing. They would have never went into the land, realized that what God had promised them to be true, that he told them that they could take it, that that land of milk and honey could be theirs. They would have never known that to be true. Right? They would have lived the rest of their life saying, what if? What if I had just done what God had asked me to do? What did I miss out on because I didn't do it? And the second would be, what about their testimony? What would their testimony have been for the rest of the generations of Israelites? When we talk about Psalms on Sunday school, when they talk about the Lord delivering them through the wilderness and giving them the land of Canaan and bringing them together to make the 12 tribes of Israel and setting them David up and all the kings that they had and the judges and all the promises that God had promised them to be true. They would have missed out on the blessings, number 1, but more importantly, they would have missed out on the testimony. And there would have been generation after generation after generation of Hebrew children that would never have heard the song or the psalm in remembrance of what God had done for them. Right? And if you let fear and your perspective take control in those troubling situations, your testimony will never grow. And you may have never gone through a scenario in which you can tell somebody, actually, I've been through that. Let me tell you how God carried me through that. And how when God carried me through that, I came out the other side better. And by the way, let me tell you how this testimony can help you, because if you trust in God like I did, I think you can make it through. I have no idea. Can't understand why. I don't understand why God lets us go through troubles and trials, except for the betterment of the kingdom. All right, I'll give you an example. We had a group of individuals that came to this church a while ago that lived a lifestyle that many in the church house struggled with, right? It was not in line with the Bible and all of these things, but we were nice to them. We showed them love. We told them how Jesus loved them. We preached them the word, and we tried to help them in a very difficult situation to get them back on the right path. I have no idea why people who were living that lifestyle would decide to come to a Baptist church in a small town just outside of Amish country. That seems very bizarre to me. It doesn't seem like the type of thing that we would normally run into, right? However, if we think about the world that we live in, and we think about our pastor and the people in this church, and we think about how that lifestyle is becoming incumbent in the world, and then we talk to people who are dealing with struggles about that lifestyle, we now have a testimony to say, actually, I can tell you about that a little bit. I can tell you about what God did in our church. I can tell you about how we loved on individuals who were outside the community and how we took care of them, how we tried to help them. That is a very, very unique testimony, all based on the idea that we didn't let fear or what we thought God promised wouldn't come true. Like in the New Testament, when the New Testament says, love your neighbor, does it say what kind of neighbor? Does it say what color neighbor? Does it say what address they live in or what county they live in, whether they're from Chester County down in the city or Honeybrook out here in Pennsylvania or wherever? It just says love your neighbor, right? And we can say, actually, I've lived an experience where I've loved my neighbor when I completely disagreed with a lot of the things that they did in their life. But I still had the opportunity to give them the testimony, tell them about the Lord and all of these things. Imagine the opposite. What if we hadn't done that? What if we hadn't been caring or loving and told them, actually, you can't ever come through the threshold of this church ever again because of the lifestyle that we disagree with? What kind of testimony would that have been? Right? Somebody who was really struggling for help in their life, looking for a solution, would have said, the church isn't the place to find it. God wasn't in it. I found no help there. I'll never go back. Or the alternative, we would never be able to witness to somebody and say, actually, I think I understand what you're going through. I've dealt with this situation before. Let me tell you how God can help you. Or the third scenario, you talk to somebody that you know that goes to a different church, somebody from my home church way back in Ohio, 500, 600 miles from here. And they say, we had this really weird situation where somebody who lived a completely different lifestyle, something that was against the Bible, came into the church and we didn't know what to do. Let me tell you about the experience we had. Let me tell you about the testimony we can carry forward because of that, right? You have no idea what God can use with that testimony or what He can use when you step into the promise. But you can't let your perspective or your fear or your uncertainty about whether God is going to actually do the thing He says He's going to do or not hold you back. Because He will do what He says He's going to do. He's always done what He said He was going to do. And as you go through your life, you will realize, like we always say, that Christian rearview mirror. And you look back in the road that you've traveled and you say, actually, you know what? Those missed turns, those turns that I thought I was supposed to take that I missed, or that road sign I didn't understand, yeah, I can see where it took me now, right? Because has these Hebrew children trusted the report of the spies and not crossed over, they would have went back to Egypt. They would have went back to a place God had never intended them to be. All right? So when we go through troubles and trials in our life, which happen, the Bible doesn't say we won't have them. The Bible says, in fact, you will have them. But when you have them, it's an opportunity to be a reflection of Christ into the world. Right? That is the unique thing about the gospel of Jesus Christ, about his salvation, and about the testimony that we have as Christians, is when somebody sees us in a trial like the Hebrew children, they can say, I had no idea that was even possible. How do people even do that? And then we get the opportunity to say, it's because of Jesus. It's because of the Bible. It's because of God. What he's done for me, what he's done for my life. Let me tell you how good he's been to me. And then all of a sudden we open up this opportunity to witness. Had they gone back to Egypt, everybody in that territory would have known they didn't trust in God. Right? All of a sudden the rumor mill would have started in the Middle East in that time, right? Like it does at work. Oh, well, you know, they could have had it, but they didn't trust in God, and God didn't deliver them, so he must not be the real God. Well, you know, they never should have left Egypt anyway. I don't know why they would have thought about that. You know, I knew that God would never do that for them. What a mistake. I'm glad they came back because I knew God couldn't do that thing. Right? You got to understand, there's a much bigger sphere of our testimony than we ever see. And we got to live our life so that we have the testimony, so we don't let our perspective change the walk that we have with the Lord. Right? Because it's very easy when we're in those situations to only see one side of the story. But know God's on the other side saying, what's the holdup? Why are you struggling? I've given you the word. I've given you the comforter. You have the Holy Ghost. I've given you salvation. I've told you what I'll do for you. And on top of that, I told you you've read the end of the book. I know where you're going to be someday. Why don't you just do it? Right? We got to remember our perspective is real. What we see in life seems true to us, right? Just like the spy story. Hey, there's a lot of people in there, and they're giants, and they have walled cities, and they probably have spears and swords and all this kind of stuff, and we don't have any of that. I've been in the desert for 40 years with the same pair of shoes on. I'm not prepared for this, Lord. This isn't what I signed up for, right? But the Lord on the other side is saying, no, you got to step out. You got to do it. You got to follow my promise, because even though you see one side of it, I see the other side. And you only see the other side if you trust in the Lord's promises, right? If you never get over the hang up of not being able to witness to somebody, you'll never witness to somebody. If you never get over the hang up of, if I try to read the Bible, I don't understand it, you'll never try to read the Bible, right? And this happens all the time in our Christian life, right? And think about all of the things. I'll never serve in the church. I'm not capable of. Yeah, probably not, until you try to serve in the church. Because then you'll realize there's this whole world of things like sweeping the floor or cutting the grass or doing whatever that you possibly can do, right? The world for the work of the Lord and our testimony opens up tremendously when we begin to trust in him. So what I'm going to ask you to do as you go through the rest of the week and you go through a trial, remember, what you see in your perspective seems true to you. It is real. You're living it. But just take a step back, take a couple breaths and say, okay, what's the Lord's perspective on this? How do I live my life the way he wants me to live? Because in reality, I could have had heart trouble, right? I could have been down on it. I could have ran back to Egypt, stopped coming to church because I got scared or whatever, right? Not to use you as an example, but you know what I mean. And then all of a sudden, could have not went back to the doctor because I was worried about what they were going to say and not got the good report that actually all the things that they said they thought was wrong with me, actually, there's only a little bit, and they're able to solve it, right? You would have never stepped into that if you had ran back to Egypt, right? You got to remember those things when we live our Christian life. Now, that's easier said than done. Don't get me wrong, because in the moment, you know, we lose our head. We get in this downward spiral, you know, of doubt and fear, and then doubt and fear, and we stay up at night and all these types of things. But just remember, there are two perspectives in all those situations. Ours and the Lord's is the one that matters. All right? Over to you, brother. We'll do prayer time. Yes, sir.
I always look at the Israelites like, how the major things that they block, they witnessed, like their own eyes. Part of the sea, the birds dropping out of the sky so they can eat. Like
hit a rock and water comes out to water 2 million people.
Bread, just eat this bread. And they still turn back. Like, but I'm the same way. And like with it was a good message, very good message, thank you. And just how our minds are so finite.
the beauty of the Bible is the way it's written. Right? If you read through it too quickly, you don't understand the beauty of the literature. Right? The story about the Israelites in all of the scenarios draws us in to say, what is wrong with these guys? They're idiots. What are they doing? God took care of them for 40 years. It never says that they had to make new shoes. They ate every day. They got water. I can't believe they would do that. And then you get this perspective of like, wait a minute. And then you look in the mirror and all of a sudden it challenges your heart. And that's the beauty of the Bible. That's the beauty of how it's written. And you're right. You get kind of self-righteous when you read about some of these people in the Bible, and all of a sudden it changes you a little bit when it hits home. Yeah.
Amen. Thank you for that, Nate. I enjoyed it. How's your perspective? How are you looking at things in life? That's what I was thinking about while he was talking. They missed out. They had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years because they had the wrong perspective. A lot of them missed out on what God had for them because they looked at life, they looked at the enemy, they looked at the trials of life from the wrong perspective. So how's your perspective? How are you looking at what comes to you in life? That's what I was thinking while you were talking. I enjoyed that, Nate. I enjoyed that a lot. And as you said, it's easy for us to judge. How could they doubt God? God said, hey, God took them from Egypt. God delivered them across the Red Sea. And now God says, I'll give you this land. And they go in and they say, you can't do that. And we're quick to judge. I remember a few weeks ago I preached about how the crowd chose Barabbas over Christ. And we're like, how could you do that? Why would you do that? Or how Peter took his eyes off Christ while he was walking on the water. Peter, how could you do that? You're walking on water. Why would you take your eyes off the one that's helping you? So many times in life we're like, man, why would they do that? And then it hits us. We're like, well, we're the same way. God put those scenes in the Bible for a reason for us to learn from. I believe so. I believe without beyond a shadow of a doubt, God put those scenes in the Bible for me to learn from. For when I fall short, there's still a pathway back to Him. I think about David and Bathsheba. David fell short of what God had for him. He sinned, but we see David repented and he turned his heart back towards God. That's why that story is in the Bible. Because God wanted us to see nobody's perfect. Nobody in here is going to be perfect. We'll fall, we'll stumble, but there's always a way back to God. We just got to look to Him and repent. Thank you, Brother Nate, for that message. I enjoyed it. Take out your prayer list if you have it.